You may have noticed that we've begun to introduce lots of different vocabulary terms that talk about getting away from allocative efficiency or the failure to get to allocative efficiency. Economics is a very vocabulary-rich course. That is, understanding your vocabulary really can help you express yourself in a solid economic way. I think what's important about all these terms is that we remember that they're all indications that allocative efficiency isn't occurring. When we talk about equilibrium, that very basic concept that we begin with in the beginning of the course, when we talk about equilibrium, it is a very simple concept. It's so simple, in fact, that it's probably too simple and probably doesn't really exist. So, to talk about why it doesn't exist, we need a variety of terms. Some of these are very specific. For example, we talked about community surplus loss, or producer surplus, or consumer surplus loss. We talked about that a lot when we talked about government intervention. So the government was intervening and keeping the economy from getting to equilibrium. This is probably not as relevant to our study of externalities or even market failure. We'll see some places in market failure where it's a good indication. The major reason that it's not very useful is that it would be very hard to point to on a diagram, just physically hard to show, but also in some cases, it would be hard to argue that community surplus had in fact been lost. Some other terms, whenever we look at welfare loss is a more general term, simply saying we could have been better off. So it's like whenever allocative efficiency doesn't happen, welfare loss is occurring. So it's probably the most general term you could use, and the rest of these are maybe more specific terms that are useful in different situations. I like the term deadweight loss when we talk about someone having to carry something that hasn't become useful for them. So I always tell the story of walking up or going on a hike and picking up rocks and putting it in somebody's backpack. Well, that weight is a burden because it costs them energy, it's heavy on their back, but it doesn't provide them anything good when they get to where they're going. They can't eat it or sleep in it or do anything like that. So it's not that this term is better than that term or better than these two. It's just that it's more useful in some places than others. Potential welfare gain. This is saying, well, gosh, if I had done this, if I had made this choice, I would be better off than I did now. So it's not that you necessarily lost anything, like maybe what happened here. I carried rocks up a mountain and it didn't do me any good. But it's more like, well, if I had brought my camera, I could have taken a really cool picture. But I didn't bring my camera, so I had a potential welfare gain, but I didn't get it. Spillover costs and benefits. This is useful when we're talking about how a cost or a benefit is affecting another person. So you can see this is very specific to talking about an externality. You know, you can look at the imagery or think about the imagery of filling something up with a cup with a bottle of water, and once the cup is full, it begins to spill over onto something else. Maybe like that cool thing they do with champagne and the pyramid of champagne glasses. So this vocabulary, it's just another way of expressing an externality, but it's a little bit more vivid because it's indicating that it's filling one thing up and spilling onto the rest. Like I said, you can look at these different terms as an obstacle or an opportunity. Let's look at how we can use them to our best advantage and really give some richness to our discussion. Here's our different externalities that we've studied, and you can see all four of them are there. We've got production externalities and consumption externalities. These are negative and those are positive. If we have the task of describing how allocative efficiency could be improved or isn't being reached in all these scenarios, we can see that two different terms are going to be a little bit more useful here. I'd also like to point out that I've done my analysis a little bit differently here. Instead of bringing down things to the axis, I've just circled the two different equilibriums and called one social and one private in all 4 diagrams. It's interesting to note, and even as I was looking at the differences I drew this up, it gave me some clearer understanding. Let me point that out to you. In the negative externalities, what we see is that the private market produces further to the right too much compared to what society wants. So P is further to the right than S. But you'll notice if you look on the y-axis, here S is higher than P, but P is higher than S. I had to think about it a little bit here, but what we see is that because this is production, we're really more concerned about cost. So our argument would be that society is paying a higher cost than the private market. That is, the private parties are paying a certain amount of cost, but then additional cost is being passed along. It's a spillover cost. See how that's useful there? It's a spillover cost onto society. Likewise here, since this is about benefits, well, now what we're saying is that society benefits less than what the private parties benefit by. When we look at a positive externality of production, again on the y-axis, we can see that private costs, some of them are being shared by society. Society is getting to enjoy some of those private costs. Likewise down here, for a positive externality of consumption, now what we can see is that for the private parties, their benefits are spilling over onto society. They're getting all the benefits, but society is getting benefits too. Remember, this was like a vaccine. This vocabulary is a little bit more useful when we analyze what's actually happening. Remember, dead weight loss to society is about somebody, in this case society, it's about somebody carrying something, having a burden placed on them that they don't benefit from. So what we see are these additional costs. Well, those costs are a burden on society, yet society isn't benefiting from the consumption of this product. So oftentimes we talk about pollution as a negative externality of production. If I live next to a copper mining facility, I think of Chile and I think Peru, there's these horrible pictures that come out of those 2 countries about the pollution that occurs in those countries, especially the air pollution. Well, if I live near there, I have to see that pollution. I have to pay for that pollution. Maybe it causes health costs for me. So those are a cost on society, yet I'm not benefiting from the actual good. So it makes more sense to call that a dead weight loss to society than to call it welfare loss. Yeah, it's also welfare loss, that's fine, but this is more descriptive. Likewise here, when we look at negative externality of consumption, is that because the private market is consuming too much, it's taking away from the benefit, the enjoyment of society. So that is a burden on society. They're having to, from my previous example, they're having to hear the loud music instead of being able to enjoy some nice quiet time at home. So they're carrying a burden, yet they're not enjoying the benefit. Here it makes a little bit more sense to talk about potential welfare gain, because what we're saying, if we were to look at consumer and producer surplus or community surplus, what we're saying is if we were to take that all the way to here, that would be a greater amount of community surplus. But because the private market isn't recognizing what society wants, they haven't gained what they could have. So they've missed out on an opportunity. And to really bring the point home of why positive externalities are a market failure, it's that right there. We could have been better off, but we weren't. We missed an opportunity and we're not as well off as we could have been. Again, here, the private market stops producing here, so this would be the amount of community surplus, and it could have expanded all the way to there, so it could have been much larger. So you could actually see, I think it would be fairly easy to draw in community surplus in both of these and look at how it would have expanded. Keep in mind that if we are looking at an expansion of community surplus, it's not going to include all of this region. Remember, this region is a spillover benefit. So what we're saying is that when this quantity is consumed by the private market, there's a spillover benefit on society of that much, and that much, and that much, and that much, and all that. So this whole region, society is already getting, even when the production is only here at P. So that's why it's only the yellow region that is the potential welfare gain. That is, society has gained this region that I've just drawn in